I'm divorcing you for money and moving in with her. You can have custody, so get out. I couldn't believe he would say such a thing to me right after I had given birth. Steve smiled with satisfaction and put his arm around the woman next to him. It's so sad that Steve has to deal with a gold digger like you. Don't worry, I'll love him so much from now on. Oh, Sarah, you're such an adorable girlfriend. Their performance made me feel like vomiting. The two of them were practically radiating hearts with their love. So even while I was in the hospital after giving birth, Steve had been nurturing his love for this woman in our home. I was beyond angry. I was dumbfounded. Come on, hurry up and get out, old lady. The woman called Sarah waved her hand at me as if shooing away a dog. Could she really be okay with this? Steve, he only makes $800 a month. Will they be okay? Well, she did say she'd love him. So I guess she's ready for it. Thinking that way, I gave up and left the house. My name is Steve Susan. I'm 30 years old. I work as an office clerk. While leading a relatively fulfilling work life, I met a man through a friend's introduction. That man was Steve Miller. We got along well, and we started dating. We quickly moved towards marriage, thanks to Steve's cheerful personality. When we moved into our new apartment and started living together, he said, I'm good at cooking and laundry. I'll never leave all the housework to my wife. He was very dependable. True to his word, Steve didn't push the housework onto me and did his share. I was satisfied with Steve's cooking skills. One day, Steve brought up the topic of having a child. My job was busy, so I thought it was still too early. If it's our child, they will definitely be cute. But I'm still enjoying my job. It's better to have kids sooner. I'd regret it if we miss the chance. So I really want you to have one. When he said that much, I couldn't help but consider it. I had always wanted children someday, and seeing how much Steve wanted it, I decided to try for a baby. Fortunately, we conceived quickly, and we were thrilled with the new life on the way. However, I didn't know that a dark shadow was already creeping into our home. During the period leading up to my maternity leave, I tried to avoid overtime and come home early. My co-workers were all kind and considerate of my pregnancy. However, my husband Steve was not. He began to insist that I should do the housework since I was coming home earlier. If you can come home early, Susan, you should do the chores, right? You're going to be a mother. How can you not handle housework? Although I had relied on Steve before, I didn't expect him to say this during my pregnancy. I thought it was unfair, but feeling guilty for having relied on him so much, I began to focus on doing the housework. My belly grew bigger each day. The amount of housework increased. I got my priorities wrong. During a prenatal checkup, the doctor warned me, at this rate, you might have a preterm birth. Steve, I'm sorry, I need to reduce my housework load a bit. I said to him, What are you whining about? But the doctor said, No way, if you're not working, you need at least this much exercise from housework. Even though I hadn't started maternity leave yet, Steve was treating me like I was already unemployed. I was baffled by Steve's sudden strictness, but he stopped doing any housework until I finished it. He even started going out more, spending less time at home. Left with no choice, I continued doing housework after work and on weekends until I was finally hospitalized for preterm labor. I reflected on this. Despite the doctor's warnings, I ended up putting a strain on the baby. I felt incredibly disappointed in myself. What shocked me the most was Steve's cruel words during this time. Hospitalized, Susan. You're a terrible mother. With you like this, the baby won't be born healthy. What? What are you saying, Steve? That's too much. I got angry too and ended up fighting with him. Steve completed the hospital admission process and then went home, never visiting me again. This really wore me down. Being almost bedridden and connected to tubes, I couldn't get a change of clothes. I hurriedly contacted my mom. Upon hearing the situation, she immediately came and brought my clothes and necessities. It was embarrassing that I had to rely on my mother, who lived far away, instead of my husband. But my mom tried to cheer me up. Just focus on the delivery and take it easy. Thank you, Mom. Still, Steve is really troublesome, making a pregnant woman do chores. I'll give him a good talking to when I see him next. My dad also came with my mom on his days off. If there's anything we can do to help, don't hesitate to tell us. You're our daughter no matter what. Dad. I was deeply touched by how much my dad cared. Spending more time with my parents, I began to think about life after the baby was born. It's clear Steve can't be relied on. No matter how many messages or calls I leave, he never responds. I was completely fed up with him, ignoring my attempts to reach out. Honestly, the thought of divorce was starting to cross my mind. Mom, can I stay with you after the baby is born? I might need to stay for a while. I cautiously asked my mom. I hadn't told her I was considering divorce yet, but she seemed to sense it. She nodded emphatically and said, of course. We've already got the room all ready. Don't worry, leave it to me. Mom, thank you so much. Feeling relieved to have a place to go after the baby was born, I resolved to not rely too heavily on my parents. I wanted to be a dependable parent like my mom. Then, while still in the hospital, I went into labor and gave birth. It was a week earlier than expected, so I was caught off guard, but everything went smoothly. He's such a cute baby boy. Good job, Susan. He's so adorable, Susan. You did great. My parents were so supportive. Having finished the big task, I was moved as I finally held my baby in my arms. Once I settled down, I contacted Steve from my bed. As the father, I thought he would respond, but he didn't read the message or answer the call. Until then, I thought he was just ignoring me because of our fight. But now, I started to worry that something might have happened to him. If that were the case, it would be serious. On the day of my discharge, I headed home with my parents. I parted with them at the front door and told them I'd contact them later. I wondered if Steve was okay. But as soon as I opened the front door, I heard a conversation that made me feel weak. From the back of the room, I could hear Steve and a young woman's voices. Oh no, she's back, Steve. Seriously, you should have written down the time properly. You're still as thoughtless as ever. Why was an unfamiliar woman's voice coming from our home? I opened the living room door to find Steve sitting on the sofa with a girl next to him. Who are you? Nice to meet you. You're the lazy wife, Susan. Right, I'm Steve's girlfriend, Sarah Johnson. Lazy girlfriend. I glared at Steve, trying to understand what was happening. But he, without a hint of remorse, proudly declared, Yes, Sarah is my new partner. What are you saying? You're the father of this child. I showed him the baby in my arms. But Steve, unimpressed, just glanced at the baby and snorted. I'm divorcing you for money and moving in with her. You can have custody, so get out. What? I was speechless. How could he think I was after his money? But the shameless pair entered full love mode, cuddling up to each other just to spite me. It's so sad that Steve has to deal with a gold digger like you. Don't worry, I'll love him so much from now on. Oh, Sarah, you're such an adorable girlfriend. I was beyond angry, just utterly exasperated with Steve's ridiculous behavior. So, while I was in the hospital giving birth, Steve was nurturing his love for this woman. His increased harshness towards me and pushing the housework on me must have been influenced by this Sarah. Understanding this made everything clear, and I let out a deep sigh. Divorce was now inevitable. Strangely, I felt a sense of relief, having been prepared for this outcome. Fine, I'll divorce you, Steve. I'll take full responsibility for raising this child. When I firmly conveyed this, Steve smiled with satisfaction. I narrowed my eyes and asked, "So, what do you mean by saying I'm after your money?" "If anything, I have a higher income." But Steve, breathing heavily, said, "You're planning to quit your job. That means you intend to leech off me." "Quit? I'm just taking maternity and parental leave. Sure, my income will be lower, but I'm not quitting. Why do you think that?" "Shut up. Do you think I don't see through your plan to quit and live off me? You're a parasite." I was stunned by his paranoid accusations. How did he come to such a conclusion? Sarah butted in from the side. "It's a terrible thing, relying on Steve's money. It's absolutely unforgivable." Yeah, if Sarah hadn't told me, I would have been fooled too. It seems to me that he's already being fooled by this Sarah. At this point, I just wanted them to do whatever they wanted. I took out my phone and contacted my parents. They were shocked and said they'd come right away. "I'll stay here until my parents arrive." How audacious. Fine, I'm kind, so I'll let you stay in the corner. Who was really the audacious one? After a while, my parents arrived. I calmed them down and asked them to wait outside while I packed my things. "Hurry up and get out, old lady." Sarah laughed triumphantly. She was clearly mistaken, so I decided to set her straight. "I'm going to stay with my parents for a while, but you two will have to leave eventually." "What? Why? This is going to be my and Steve's love nest." "No, that's not happening. I'm the one paying the rent here. There's no way I'll keep paying for you." The lease was in Steve's name, but the account used for payment was mine. Sarah probably didn't know this. She showed a moment of surprise. What? But then quickly started making her own assumptions. "Oh, so you pay the rent, and Steve pays for everything else. You must have been splurging on living expenses. Poor Steve." "What? Oh yeah, that's right." Yeah, right. Did she not know that Steve's take-home pay is only $800 a month? Sarah, who had just accused me of being a gold digger, seemed clueless about our financial situation. Steve, too, seemed unaware of the household finances. Since I managed everything. I work at an accounting firm and am well versed in financial matters. I have a good salary and pay the rent, and we split most living expenses. Steve works as a cook at a restaurant. He dreams of owning his own place someday, and I initially supported and believed in him. Embarrassingly, it's a case of love being blind. But with him only working about 3 days a week, his salary was low. I finally woke up and advised him to work more. "I want to use my days off to study cooking," he said. I reluctantly accepted his excuse. I left most of the housework to him and appreciated his improving cooking skills. But now I realize that was just an excuse. He was probably using those days off to meet Sarah. He didn't worry about money because he didn't know our financial situation. He'd never seen the bank book or household budget and didn't understand our cash flow. His confidence also came from the monthly allowance from his doting grandfather. He mistook that large sum automatically deposited as his own income. I think it was about $1,000 a month. But his grandfather passed away last month, so that money would stop. I wondered if he realized this. As I was thinking about this, Sarah wrapped her arm around Steve and said dreamily, "Well, since your family runs a traditional restaurant, everything will be fine, right? Steve is a chef at a high-end restaurant. I'm looking forward to your delicious cooking." "Yeah, I'll serve you the best dishes, Sarah." "Oh, I can't wait." Their conversation made me tilt my head in confusion. Steve's family doesn't run a traditional restaurant. They run a local ramen shop. Steve isn't a chef at a high-end restaurant. He's an apprentice cook at a family restaurant chain. It seems Steve has been feeding Sarah a lot of lies. And she's trying to take him away from me, believing those lies. Who's really after the money here? Maybe they're perfect for each other, given Steve's deceit. Seeing the situation clearly, I decided not to reveal the truth. I smiled and said, "Well, goodbye." Feeling satisfied, I left the apartment with a $1,000 rent. Steve, who takes home $800 a month, and Sarah, who doesn't seem to have a real job. I could easily imagine what would happen to them from now on. I returned to my parents' car, and we discussed how to handle the divorce preparations and procedures on top of raising the baby. The next day, my parents went to pick up my belongings since I had to look after the baby. I used a video call to tell my parents what to bring. Yes, the refrigerator and oven too. All the kitchenware on the shelves are mine. Got it, the refrigerator too. I'll let the movers know. I saw my dad on the screen, directing the movers he brought along. Then I heard Sarah's confused voice. "What? You're taking that too? The sofa, the table?" "Yes, these are all items Susan used when she was living alone." My dad showed the receipts and warranties for the items, thanks to my habit of keeping documents organized. Faced with the proof, they had nothing to say. "Steve, what are we going to do? They're even taking the stuff from the fridge." "Ah, that's odd. Were those Susan's too?" It seems Steve forgot that I brought these items when we first moved in together. I watched coldly, exasperated. Sarah's frantic state continued. "Steve, we need to buy new ones quickly." "Ah, but buying all new appliances and furniture will cost a lot." "It's okay. As long as I have you, Sarah, I'm happy." That's not the point. Watching these two, I started to feel it was all just ridiculous. Meanwhile, the movers continued taking things away. Before long, the house was almost empty, leaving Steve and Sarah standing there alone. My parents, who had paid the movers, kept the video call connected as they faced the two traitors. "We're leaving now, Steve. Don't ever leech off Susan again. And you will pay both alimony and child support properly." With that, my parents left Steve and Sarah standing in the doorway. Soon after, we could hear them arguing. When I informed Steve's parents about the situation, they promptly came to my parents' house to apologize. My father-in-law even got down on his knees, looking like he was about to cry. "I'm so sorry for what my foolish son has done," saying he doesn't want custody. "I am utterly disgusted with him." They were both so excited about the birth of their grandchild. And now their son, the father, had given up custody. When they heard about it, my mother-in-law fainted. Seeing them so distressed, I couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for them too. Meanwhile, Steve, oblivious to his parents' anguish, quickly became alarmed as his savings dwindled. I had stopped paying the rent, so he had to pay it himself, but the rent was more than his income. With a monthly income of $800, it was impossible to continue living there. He called me in a ridiculous panic. "Why is there so little money in the account, Susan? Are you withdrawing it without permission?" I calmly responded, "Of course not. Check the withdrawal account, and your grandfather's deposits have stopped, so it's only natural for the balance to decrease." Even after realizing the money situation, it was too late. Unable to pay the rent, Steve and Sarah were eventually evicted by the landlord. "What do you mean, Steve? This wasn't part of the plan." "I can't believe we can't even stay in the house without Susan." "Oh, I know, I have my parents." Steve shamelessly turned to his parents for help. At first they refused, but they couldn't completely abandon their own son. Reluctantly, they agreed to take in both Steve and Sarah. However, when Sarah saw their family business, she stood there with her mouth agape. "What is this? It's not a high-end restaurant. It's just a humble ramen shop." What a rude remark. Even though they took them in, Steve's parents didn't just coddle them. Steve's parents, who ran an old-fashioned ramen shop, were serious and hard-working. Steve had been surrounded by cooking since he was a child. While this likely sparked his interest in cooking, his ambitions were elsewhere. Before taking him in, Steve's parents came to greet me. "We'll keep a close eye on them and make sure they pay back what they owe," Steve's father said, scratching his head. He's always looked down on our shop, saying he wanted to work in a fancy restaurant. He's always had this pretentious, dreamy side to him. I also mistook Steve's dream chasing nature for something admirable and fell for him, so I can't really say much. That's why I didn't mind his low income and even thought it would be fine for him to be a stay-at-home dad while I returned to work soon after giving birth. But that was all ruined by his affair. In the end, Steve's actions severed his chance for a stable future. We will make sure Steve and Sarah pay alimony and child support. That's the least we can do for our grandchild. My mother-in-law wiped her tears and put her head down deeply. Steve and Sarah were thrown out of their home. From now on, they would be under the watchful eye of Steve's parents. Steve's parents promised to monitor their bank accounts and make them work at the restaurant to pay off their debts. Honestly, I initially thought they might side with Steve since he was family. But they showed their sincerity by even writing a pledge. Their earnest response convinced my parents and me to trust them. Steve's parents proved to be truly honest and serious people. Sarah was made to live in a nearby apartment to prevent her from running away and was forced to work at the ramen shop every day. She reportedly complained, "Why do I have to work at a ramen shop?" But it was all her own doing. Sarah had no family and lived by latching on to wealthy men. She targeted Steve, thinking she could enjoy an easy life with him, but things didn't turn out as she expected. For someone who wanted a glamorous lifestyle, working as a waitress in a humble ramen shop was unbearable. She once tried to run away at night, but was caught by the live-in manager, who was a friend of Steve's mother. She was forced into an even stricter lifestyle. Steve, on the other hand, couldn't make enough money just from the ramen shop, so his father sent him to work with a fisherman acquaintance. Steve ended up on a fishing boat to earn money. The fisherman, who was even stricter than Steve's father, promised to straighten him out. Steve was subjected to harsh, Spartan-style discipline. He was reportedly seasick and yelled, "I wanted to be a cook, not get tossed around on these rough seas." Whether he actually shouted that or not, the income he earned was very helpful to me, with his parents watching over them. Their bank accounts were tightly controlled, and money was still being deposited into my account every month. About a year later, I, now a single mother, returned to work as soon as possible to earn money. With the help of my parents, I juggled childcare and work, leading a busy life. One day, I was surprised to see my in-laws visit my accounting office. I was confused about what was going on, but I invited them in. They looked utterly exhausted. We didn't know where else to go, and this was the only place we could think of. "You probably don't want to see us." Listening to my father-in-law's story, I was shocked. Sarah had started posting slander about their ramen shop on social media and blogs. She claimed the back of the shop was full of cockroaches, the ingredients were expired, and they reused unwashed dishes, or lies. She likely did this to tarnish the shop's reputation, hoping it would close so she could be free from working there. Such malicious and persistent posts were devastating for a restaurant. She even mocked other employees, driving them away. Unfamiliar with social media, my in-laws were overwhelmed with stress and suffered both mentally and physically. Now, the regular customers have all but disappeared, and there's no sign of them returning. The shop is on the brink of closing down. And as for Sarah, she's vanished. She escaped while my in-laws were busy trying to save the shop. Then it hit me. But in that case, the money being deposited now. The past 2 months of Sarah's share came from our own money. It didn't concern you, so we covered it. But we're our limit. I see. Seeing the hardship etched on their faces, I felt a deep anger rising within me. My in-laws had sincerely apologized and taken full responsibility for watching over Steve and Sarah. Steve was stuck on the boat, so he couldn't escape, but Sarah ran away. And she left such malicious actions behind as a parting gift. This was something I couldn't overlook. After hearing their story, I pledged my full support to my in-laws. They were the ones who helped me when I was suffering because of Steve and Sarah. Although they had to take responsibility for their son's actions, the effort must have been hard on them, given their age. They tried their best not to cause trouble until the end. Now, it's my turn to help them. As an accounting office, there wasn't much we could do, but I introduced them to all the contacts I had. A private investigator to find Sarah, a lawyer who specializes in slander cases, consultants and financial planners to help rebuild the ramen shop. I provided them with all the information I knew, and they thanked deeply in gratitude. Thank you. This will help us figure out a path forward. We can't thank you enough, Susan. Please, there's no need for that. Oh, I have an idea. Seeing my in-laws about to apologize again, I quickly spoke up with a suggestion. When you rebuild the shop, please let me come for a meal. Your ramen is delicious, after all. Tears welled up in their eyes, but I could see a hint of joy too. I handed them a lot of information that would be useful in the future. Now it was up to them. It was frustrating to only watch from a distance, but after a while, good news arrived. The private investigator found Sarah, who had gone missing. She was working at a snack bar in the downtown area, saving money to spend on a host. Using a lawyer, I seized that money for the unpaid alimony and the damages for the slander against the ramen shop. In the end, Sarah had to pay extra money because she tried to run away. Sarah, who had her savings taken away, was left penniless again. She was also fired from the snack bar after they found out about the slander incident. I had secretly informed the snack bar about her. I thought it might not be effective since I was a stranger, but the owner believed me right away. She even said, "Oh, Sarah, she would definitely do something like that. You must have had a hard time." Apparently, Sarah had been betraying their trust as well. Sarah was left with no money and no job. Despite this, I made sure to collect the 2 months of payments my in-laws had covered. Sarah tearfully called me a demon, but I didn't care. Her next job prospects vanished because the snack bar owner spread word of Sarah's misdeeds. No employer would want someone who badmouths their workplace on social media. With no money and no job, who knows where she'll end up? A year later, my in-laws opened a new restaurant. It was a more stylish place than before, attracting the attention of the townspeople. The consultant you recommended said our side dishes were great and that we should run a restaurant. Using local ingredients has really resonated with the customers. My in-laws spoke happily. They always made delicious ramen, so I knew they'd excel in other cuisines as well. Their new restaurant quickly became popular and will likely continue to thrive. When Steve heard about it, he was very frustrated. The restaurant was exactly the kind of stylish place he always dreamed of. Over the phone, he reportedly said, "Thank you, Dad and Mom. You set up such a great place for me." What an audacious remark. He's eager to work at this new restaurant once he returns, but his parents have no intention of handing it over to him. What are you dreaming about? When we can no longer work, we're closing the restaurant. What? That's not fair. If you're a man, get your own place. Isn't that your dream? Even hearing this, Steve reportedly shouted, "Is that what parents should do?" Without realizing the irony. Steve is the one who should be hearing that line. He hasn't tried to see his child once since the divorce, so he has no right to talk about what parents should do. My father-in-law later told me he consulted a lawyer about the inheritance. To ensure Steve doesn't get any, they plan to gradually transfer their assets to their grandson, Tom. I felt a bit guilty, but my in-laws insisted, so I accepted their help. In the end, Steve's actions will also cost him his future inheritance. After finishing his work as a fisherman, Steve returned with no place to call home. He once again had to survive on menial part-time jobs. And the account for paying child support is still under the strict supervision of his parents. Several years after the divorce drama, Tom finally became a first grader. Today, right after the entrance ceremony, I took my parents and Tom to my in-laws' restaurant. "Welcome, we've been waiting for you. Tom, you've grown so much." Today was actually the first time Tom met his grandparents. They had insisted on not meeting their grandson until they had made amends for their son's actions. But that time had finally come to an end. I was relieved to finally be able to introduce them. Tom was amazed at the impressive restaurant. They had reserved the entire place for us to use lavishly. When the splendid meal was served, Tom's eyes sparkled with excitement. "This is delicious. I want to make food like this." "Wait, you want to make it, not just eat it?" "Yeah, I want to make it." Tom always wants to help with cooking. I guess he inherited that trait from his father and grandparents. Maybe Tom will end up taking over this restaurant one day. "Really? I thought I'd close it down when I retire," said my father-in-law, not looking too unhappy about the idea. My parents, Tom, my in-laws, and I shared laughter and delicious food in that happy space.